that same Jesus that was going to be crucified. And so the first snapshot we see here is in verse 20, actually 32. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. Now, Matthew doesn't go into a lot of detail, but by this point, Jesus had been scourged, which meant that he had been being whipped, and that the historians would say that his back was like a hamburger, just totally ripped to shreds by the scourging. He would have been mocked, he would have been beaten. There was a crown of thorns put on his head, and so the loss of blood would have been there. And so to help him out, even though he didn't really need it, they had someone from the crowd come in to help him carry the cross. Someone that would probably be the closest person to the cross that we would see that day. And yet it's interesting, from this point, you really don't hear much about Simon's life. And then so often, what happens is someone that could be forced to the cross, but is not prepared for it. So as they were going up, they met a man named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And there they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. And we see those words, he was forced to. He was forced. You know, sometimes we can force people to come to church. Now, I hope nobody is forced this morning to come to church. Kids, young people, well, mom and dad did not force you to come to church. It's the thing we do, right? But sometimes we can feel pretty forced, can't we? We can feel like we're forced to do something we don't want to do. Like dishes. You know, like how many of you like doing dishes? Raise your hand. You can do that this morning. How many feel like when you're asked to do dishes, you're forced to do dishes? Thank you for the honesty. You know, sometimes we're forced to do something. Here was Simon. He was forced to carry the cross. And he really didn't realize what that meant. He didn't realize what it meant for him. What it meant for us. You know, so often we can think of things that we are forced to do. But yet, it's for our good. Sometimes we're forced to take medicine that we don't like taking. Sometimes we're forced to do things that we don't like, but they're for our good. And so the first snapshot we'd like to see this morning is Simon, who was forced, but yet it was for his good. And it was for our good. Because in that forcing, we can also look and say, hey, is this something I need to consider? And so one of the things I like to do with each snapshot is to consider, am I in that picture? Do I feel like I'm being forced into certain areas in my life? Have I considered Jesus and my need for the cross, or do I feel forced? Like it's being forced on me? Or am I willing to consider and say, no, I need it. I need that salvation that Jesus provided. I need to know that my sins are forgiven. The second picture we see here, as we go through the crosses, we see some snapshots. You know, some things we need to understand to make the picture come into focus. And here was Jesus, taken to Golgotha, the place of the skull. They offered him wine vinegar with some gall in it because that would kind of deaden the pain. That was probably what they were doing. It was a kind of an anesthetic to deaden the pain. Because what it would mean to be hung on the cross would mean basically you would be there suffocating. I know this is a little graphic this morning, folks, but I want us to understand the cross. Why Jesus died for us. So Jesus, by refusing that, knew exactly what he was doing. He was willing to be the Savior of us all. And to do that, he wanted to have his faculties about him. He didn't want to kind of be, half asleep. He wanted to know exactly what he was doing. Because what we need to realize with the cross is that by Jesus choosing the cross, doing the will of the Father, he freely gave himself up for us so that we can have a life with God. He wasn't forced. He wasn't forced to carry the cross. He freely gave himself as our salvation. There's other people we see at the cross. Simon would be one of them. The second picture we see here is the religious leaders, the churchgoers. They were there. And if we read over to, there were 2 robbers, they were there. So we saw the crowd, the soldiers, the religious leaders, the thieves. All of these people were part of the cross. All of them had a place there. And as we read in verse 38, and sitting down they kept on. And actually we're going to back up a bit, 35. It says, when they crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And sitting down they kept watch over him there. This is the soldiers. The soldiers were there. They were kind of there out of duty. We see that snapshot of a soldier. They were there to duty. They were there to perform the act of execution. So they were there because they wanted to be there. They were there because they were told to be there. Now that's another one that we can look at. Sometimes we do things because we're told to. We don't always like being told to. So they kind of took some time and they cast the lots and they took the clothes and they divided them up and they just sat down and they kept watch over them. They were there. Now eventually we would see one of them speaking. Towards the end of it, where he would say, surely this man is the Son of God. Because to see what happens at the cross changes you. When you're doing something just out of duty isn't enough. When you realize that so often, if we just do it because we're told to do it, eventually we will either stop doing it. And I think that's so often why some people just stop coming to church. Stop growing in the Christian walk. But when we have a true picture of the cross, of all that Jesus did, it changes from duty to declaration. Where we truly can say, surely this is the Son of God. That's what the cross is. But we see other characters there. Religious leaders, those that wanted to basically see Christ crucified because they were some afraid of them. They've been plotting for his demise. They've been plotting this. They even paid Judas Iscariot 30 pieces of silver to betray him. Because they didn't want Jesus to succeed. What happened? Oh, the religious leaders would mock them. The religious leaders would tell them that they're wrong.